Enormous Invader by Nicholl Traumia, male giant and fantasy content, far far away. Way beyond our solar system, there was a planet called AZ-2. This planet, despite being so far away, was actually very similar to Earth in many regards. It had breathable air, and even its inhabitants were very similar to people. The main differences were that they almost never waged wars. And they all spoke a language that did not resemble anything that one would hear on Earth. These sounds did not sound human. And yet, the civilization on this planet was nearly just as developed. Its people had mobile phones. The internet worked just the way it worked for Earthians. If anything, AZ-2 was about 10 years behind Earth in terms of progress, which is not a very long period of time. But all the same, something that could not be easily missable, except, of course, neither of the planets were aware of each other's existence, both worlds being thousands of light years apart. There was just a single person in the entire universe who, thanks to his friend's research, had a good hunch that a planet such as AZ-2 existed. That mysterious individual had been observing life on this planet for quite a while now. Using his state-of-art technology, it was a sunny autumn day in one of AZ-2's many cities. This one in particular would treasure its size, proudly reminding everyone that it was one of the largest cities in these parts. This city was brimming with life, as it offered thousands of places to work, accompanied by hundreds of venues where people could enjoy themselves. The city was so big that it could doubtlessly rival the capital of this realm, but that also meant that, as a result, the city was a real concrete jungle. It was very dense, and there was very little flora, in spite of the forest that was surrounding the city. But not for long. The authorities of the city already ordered to cut some of that forest out, to make space for new districts. On that day, two very attached friends, both women, both 20 years old, Nina and Nana, were headed to work. The women were office workers at one of the city's most renowned companies. For people of AZ-2, it was a great honor to work for such companies. And they were proud and happy that they both could make it. Being so attached to each other, they were nearly inseparable. It would be an unbearable pain for them to have to work at two different places. But luckily, that was not the case. As the two girls entered their office building, they began their work. The way their task lists looked, it was going to be a fairly easy day, nothing too stressful. Just cleaning up some paperwork, documents, maybe fixing a few things up in the company's database. Nothing too taxing. And so, they happily got to work. The sooner they were done, the bigger the chance they could go home earlier. And whenever they managed to go home earlier, they had a tradition of stopping by the nearby park for some relaxation, maybe even for some ice cream. Like they would ever since they were kids. After all, they had known each other since they were 5. As they were sorting the various papers in the archive room, Nina and Nana suddenly heard a strange sound, something akin to a thunder strike. Nina ran towards the window to see what was going on. It was most bizarre. There was not a single cloud in the sky. And yet, there were thunder strikes everywhere. Not only that, instead of striking the ground below, they were slowly but surely forming an oval? A very huge one, at that, looking down to the streets below. Nina could see the citizens of the city stopping doing whatever they had been doing until now, and observing the situation. Something was forming in the center of that strange lightning oval. Just what in the world was happening? In less than 10 minutes, the oval stopped changing. It was obvious what it was now. It was a portal. As people could see something in the middle of that bizarre sighting up in the sky. It looked like a very futuristic room, with various scientific equipment scattered all around it. In a few minutes the portal was fully opened, and the people in the city were able to clearly see through this huge glowing structure in the sky. On the other side of it was a futuristic room with a huge blonde giant standing in the middle of it that scared the heck out of the Asians, who did not know that this foreign giant was called Rick. He was a young freighter pilot from another world who joined the mysterious Megaryung on her mission of saving other planets from environmental crisis or other threats to planet and people on those worlds. At this point the Asians were scared for their lives, but what really added fuel to the fire was something that was inevitable. the giant smiled. An emotion that was universal no matter where one was in the universe, and with a single confident motion, put his colossal, barefoot down on the ground, effectively coming out of the portal. The booming sound of his stomp caused the tinier in comparison people to flee, and Nini and Nana had enough of watching this. They needed to flee as well. And so, they ran downstairs, leaving the building in a most justifiable hurry. They did not even care about their belongings, saving themselves was much more important right now. As they ran out of the building, they were already a bit too late, there was a swarm of running people, taking up the entire street, effectively slowing everyone down. People would knock each other out, even trampling one another, just to make it to safety. In the distance, the giant would smirk and giggle, as if the fear of the invaded people was just an innocent game for him. Once again, the giant said something, but the little humans had no idea what he was saying. Nor did they care. Once the roaring subsided, the giant simply lifted his bare foot high up and wiggled his toes, before stomping on a nearby tenement complex, being about 180 meters tall. He was more than capable of doing it in one stomp. After the dust subsided, the giant wiggled his toes to shake more of the rubble off. There were still people in that building. "Come, we need to run," Nina said, taking Nana's shaking hand. And the two began to run away. They managed to move around, but the running crowd's pressure was simply too powerful. Desperate about saving one another though the girls were, they just could not hope to withstand such force. They ended up separated, people breaking their grasp and pushing them aside with ease. "Nana! Nanea!" Screaming in hopes of finding one another in the throng was all they had left, and it was proving fruitless. After a while, however, Nina finally noticed her friend, who got pushed back in the erratically moving human mass. She tried to push towards her friend, but to no avail, unfortunately for them, as well as for everyone in the city. The enormous invader had already smashed the area around him, his feet flattening every single building on the district he stepped out on. From the looks of it, he was ready for a stroll, and without giving any warning, he laughed once more and began to walk forward. His first step already caught some fleeing people underneath his sole. And he checked his foot, that caused a wave of screams to ring out throughout the entire city. The giant did not seem to care that much about all the lives he was taking away, as he kept on walking. Sometimes even looking down to see how many of the little humans got caught up under his feet. What to him was a game, to Nana, Nina and all the rest of the Asians was a veritable struggle for survival. It was just a matter of time before Nana, constantly pushed around by her fellow fleeing people, too, found herself engulfed in the shadow of the giant's foot. She could only say a single prayer before the giant's foot, covered in flattened cars and people, slammed on top of her. She could feel something cold, as well as the giant's immense weight. She was wondering if that was what death felt like. But to her surprise, she could feel everything. And she even noticed that the other people who the giant stepped on also seemed to be intact, just in little pain. How was that even possible? What kind of sorcery was it? It turned out that the invader was using a special technology that made all living things at his feet invulnerable to his weight. Thanks to it, he could stomp around freely. But obviously, the far inferior Asians could not understand such modern, revolutionary technology. "Nana! No!" Nina screamed, as she saw her friend's form disappear under the giant's dirty foot. That particular stomp was accompanied by the sound of flattened metal. His heel happened to land on the nearby car park, smashing every single car that had been parked there. That sound, accompanied by Nana's disappearance, caused Nina to sink into despair. Instead of running away, she began to run towards the giant. Bruised from ramming into all the people trying to survive, she made it very close to the giant, who, unsurprisingly, was about to take his next step. Nina dropped, and barely managed to dodge the incoming foot. She could feel the warmth of the sole, as well as flattened bodies brushing against her tattered clothes. She burst into tears, not wanting to look up, expecting to find crushed bodies sprinkled all over the meaty soul of the cruel invader. And then, beneath, she could hear her friend's voice. Nina. I'm here, Nina. Nina did not think twice. She turned around and saw her friend, stuck to the giant's soul, waving her arms around as she was trying to free herself. Even though her effort was mostly fruitless. Nina quickly rose to her feet and started chasing the giant's foot. Almost grabbing her friend's hand, which should be enough to pull her off the sticky sweaty arch. Unfortunately, the girls missed their hands by just a centimeter, and Nina collapsed, tripping on the crushed concrete. Nana, on the other hand, was still stuck on the giant foot, and was soon pressed once more into the asphalt below, surviving that stomp as well. As Nina got back to her knees, she noticed the wake of destruction left by the giant. All buildings were at least half crushed, if not whole. The office tower in which she would work every day had a hole, the giant must have punched it with his fist, leaving a hole big enough for everyone to see right through it. There were countless footprints scattered all around too, but most surprisingly, everyone who got caught underneath this monster's feet seemed to have survived. That was relieving. But Nina still had to rescue her friend somehow. So she started chasing the giant. Running as fast as she could, she was now behind the colossal young man, giving her a really good view at his dirtier and dirtier soles. Nana was stuck on his right foot, just a bit higher up his foot than the heel was. Surprisingly, the giant seemed to be slowing down, which eventually allowed the girl to catch up to him. Finally, the giant stood still, his right sole lifted a bit up, with only his toes touching the ground. That all seemed a bit too convenient, but in the end, a 1.6-meter tall girl could not be possibly seen by him. Especially if he was 180-meter tall, and she was behind him. Still, she had more important things to do than wondering about that, and so she started climbing his foot, using other stuck people as a ladder to reach her dear friend. The giant, in the meantime, stopped his rampage for a moment because he was captivated by a very particular lake, which he could see in the forest just beyond the city. He was in awe, but then he started to feel an annoying itch down on his sole. Probably the little humans wiggling too much. Trying to get them to stop, he lowered his foot back down, as Nina was almost next to her friend. She doubled her efforts. She had to save her. When she finally got close, she smiled at her friend. And she smiled back. This moment of joy and relief was cut short, however, as the giant swiftly slammed his heel back into the ground. And so, both girls were now stuck to his sole. How were they going to get out of this? And what was going to happen to them? The minds of both girls were racing, attacked by all sorts of dreadful thoughts. The giant, in the meantime, kept walking forwards, stomping out cars and buildings alike. He would take a couple of turns before eventually, he left the city, and headed for the lake that had caught his attention earlier. Next to it was a hill, a bump in the ground that was big enough for him to notice. At the very least, he intended to get on top of it to get a good view of the city. The girls kept holding their hands, being squished right next to each other, whatever force was keeping them alive amidst all this hell. It was a miracle. They were grateful. But they really did want to know what was going to happen next. Finally, when the giant made it to his destination, he uses a strange high-tech bracelet that was made of metal and had a strange, green substance in it. He took a good look at the city, as it turned out. He had flattened more than half of it beneath his feet. He looked down at his massive stompers and flexed his toes, scraping off the tinies who got caught up underneath his 10 wiggly digits. He used the strange contraption, and fired a ball of the green substance. He seemed to aim at the city, but the strange projectile kept flying, and flying. The giant laughed blushing, as he was a bit too clumsy, so he fired his bracelet blaster again. And this time, it fired a continuous bolt of green energy, which caused flora to grow at an unbelievably rapid rate wherever this energy reached. He painted the entire zone of his rampage with this, causing a forest to grow there. The tiny humans who got embedded into his footprints were now running for their lives, no longer from the colossus, but from the equally giant trees. The buildings that only got half crushed ended up covered by moss, vines, and other kinds of plants, making them appear like some ruins of old, even if just an hour earlier. There were people living in them, admiring his work. The giant smiled, and then caused a very similar portal to open up next to him. Once again did he feel the annoying itch, and he checked his soul. Surely, there were countless tiny humans stuck to it. He used the big toe of his other foot to scrape them off, and then pressed the big toe firmly into the ground. The girls screamed as the giant toe tore them off the sole, and then even harder when the giant started to lower it. They felt pressure like never before as their faces got dirty from the ground they were pressed so firmly into. Finally, the pressure began to fade away, as the invader pulled his toe out of the ground. Giggling at the crater he had formed with nothing more than his toe. This excitement, unrequited by the humans at his feet, caused him to forget about the little humans on his other foot. As he entered the portal, and disappeared along with it, finally feeling safe, the two girls helped each other out of the crater. That was a doomsday, or so they felt, at the very least. Even though they did not know whether their homes were still standing. At least they still had one another. They smiled at each other, their clothes equally tattered. As they began to walk to the city, well, the half that was still remaining, as for the giant who invaded AZU2. He felt proud about saving yet another world, had he not stomped half of that city out. The entire planet of AZ2 would turn into a wasteland, with no forests left to support nature. And so, that fateful day, dubbed as Doomsday by most Asians, was the dawn of a new era, an era of appreciation for nature and its preservation. The end. This story was originally written by Nicholl Traumia, link is in the description. The events in this story take place after Season 1 of the Megaryung YouTube series. To fit better into our canon, some parts of this story have been slightly modified. If you like our work, please consider joining us on Patreon for more extra content. This way you support our work and help us to create more content and videos. Thanks for listening.